Hey everyone! I'm sure you missed these lectures, but I thought I would round out the semester and provide you with a few more before we wrap up. We are currently on Module 10, which is crazy, right? This last half of the semester seems to be flying by pretty quickly. So if you are following the course schedule, you're noticing that really we've wrapped up the text in a number of ways. And so now we're focusing on the appendix because I wanted to make sure you really read it cover to cover. And today, or for this module, we're going to be talking about ethics and risk management, which of course is something that is a very important topic in the world of counseling. It is something that you will be hearing about in every single course, and then you will take an actual course on ethics. So we really like to emphasize the importance of maintaining ethical practices in counseling. Towards the end of the real end of the semester for Module 12, 13, 14, we're going to be focusing on counseling individuals from specific populations, and we'll hear a little bit more about theory within that, but again, please know that you've got a whole entire semester in Counseling 606 to talk about theories and techniques, and we will certainly be doing that when the time comes. For this module, you just have a discussion post. Next week, we got a discussion and reflection paper, a couple more discussions, and then the baseline video won't be due until December. And then when we get closer to the final, and I just did want to mention this now that we're past the midway point, I'll have a bit of a review for you for the final exam, which is not overly complex or difficult, I don't think. So, but let's move into ethics today, okay? I love the field of ethics in general. I love teaching about ethics. I love talking about ethical dilemmas, and a lot of people will look at ethics, the class, or anything that has to do with ethics, and just kind of groan and think it's really boring, and especially in our field, kind of wonder, well, I don't need to worry about it. I'm not going to be sleeping with my clients, and I'm going to be acting appropriately, and I will never, face any kind of ethical dilemma or ethical boundary crossing at any point in my life or my professional career. And that's not the case. Ethics creep into the world of counseling in ways that we might not expect, and that it happens probably quicker than you think. A lot of ethical dilemmas can be resolved very easily if a counselor follows a decision-making model, which the ACA has endorsed a decision-making model specifically for counselors to use who are faced or posed with ethical dilemmas. And a lot of the work that you do in understanding our codes of ethics will help you prepare better so that you reduce the risk of putting yourself or putting your client into a situation where there could be a boundary crossing or a potential ethical violation that was unintended. So a lot of the things that you can do as a counselor in your practice later on are on the back end of everything. And that's why we talk a lot, especially this early on, about providing informed consent, about having confidentiality discussions with clients, because they seem more like the business talk that you might have with a client, where we're trying to really develop personal relationships with our clients, professional relationships with our clients. But these topics that we have to, and these conversations we have to have with clients, are very direct in a way, and cut and dry depending on how you approach it. So looking at the PowerPoint for the week, very relatively short PowerPoint, but there are two main codes of ethics that we're going to be talking about in this program: the American Counseling Association Code of Ethics and the Commission on Rehabilitation Counselor Certification, CRCC, Code of Ethics. So those are our two main professional organizations that when you are going through this degree program, those are the ones you would be identifying with from a professional standpoint. There are lots of other professional organizations out there, and some of those professional organizations have developed their very own codes of ethics. So if you are going to be a member of the Association of Specialists in Group Work, they have their own code of ethics. If you are going to be a member of the Counselors for Social Justice or Multicultural Counseling organizations, they have their own codes of ethics. So school counselors have their own codes of ethics, family counselors have their own codes of ethics. So This is not it. If you opt to join any other professional organization, I will tell you now and remind you constantly that you should be looking to make sure if they have a code of ethics, what it says, how and what kind of recommendations and guidelines it provides to you as a clinician practicing under that umbrella. These codes of ethics are updated very regularly for good reason. They're kind of quote unquote living documents. They provide guidelines but don't cover every single possible dilemma. And I think that's really important. You know, there's a lot of gray in the world of law in general. Ethics are not the law, but a lot of times we read them and we think, well, that sounds kind of like a legal mandate to us, you know, what we should or should not be doing. And so there may be times where ethics, codes of ethics and the law align. There may be times where they don't exactly align, and there may be times where specific codes of ethics really contradict each other or are telling you different things. One example that I like to give, NBCC, which is the National Board of Certified Counselors, kind of like the sister agency to the CRCC. NBCC is the organization where you would get the NCC credential, so the National Certified Counselor credential. They have their own code of ethics, and then CRCC has their own code of ethics, obviously. Developing relationships with past clients are looked at very differently under those two codes of ethics. There's a little bit more leniency and leeway under NBCC, whereas under CRCC, it's very stringent. You know, rarely, if ever, would you ever develop a romantic relationship with a client under the CRCC's codes of ethics. NBCC allows a little bit more, and NBCC differs in that way from the American Counseling Association. So then you wonder, what the heck am I supposed to do? You're supposed to do no harm. And so, you know, whenever you are faced, again, with an ethical dilemma, the very first thing, according to every board of licensed counseling, LPC board that's out there, certification bodies that are out there, the very first thing that you should do is consult your code of ethics and go through a decision-making process whenever you are faced with an ethical dilemma. If you do not do those things and somebody files a complaint against you, it's going to reflect very poorly on you and your ability to make a decision if not only did you violate a code of ethics, but then you never went back to that code of ethics and tried to rectify the situation. So in terms of confidentiality, we have reviewed a bit about confidentiality, and you all have practiced giving that spiel at the beginning of a client session about confidentiality, the limits to confidentiality. Limits to confidentiality are very important to talk about early on at the very beginning of those counseling relationships during intake and that first session, but also to revisit those limits to confidentiality periodically as you progress through the counseling process. Especially if a client starts to talk about something and you know that it can be a trigger in your head, like, this could be something where I might have to breach confidentiality. You can interrupt a client and say, if before you share anything else, I just want to remind you that, while things are maintained and kept confidential in our conversations, there are these instances where I am required to breach confidentiality and report to Child Protective Services that there is a child in danger, for example. So you want to check state guidelines because state guidelines will differ in terms of who's considered a mandated reporter, although counselors across the board are mandated reporters. But in terms of ages of majority for clients and different specifics around working with minors, working with children, what limits to confidentiality come into play when working with children. Dual relationships, so that's where you may know a client from outside of the counseling realm. A lot of times this occurs in rural populations, within military bases where you got a lot of people that know each other coming together in a small area. Within the recovery community, there can be dual relationships that pop up. So those also need to be attended to. Again, with dual relationships, a lot can be managed and handled on the back end. If you have an admin that takes your appointments for you and you see on your calendar that, your very best friend from kindergarten, their brother is now on your client list to do that initial session with you, the best thing to do at that point, if the option is there, is to not even meet with your best friend from kindergarten's brother, because that would open up Pandora's box to breaching, confidentiality and putting you right in the heart of an ethical dilemma. So if you're able to field these situations, great. If not, if you are working in let's say, a very small community and you're the sole counselor, it's all about maintaining professionalism and determining whenever you have clients that come in, if you can really be non-biased. Let's say if you have been working for a long time with the wife of a man who is now also seeking individual counseling from you as the sole counselor, could you actually maintain neutrality with that client couple if you've been seeing one independently for quite some time? More often than not, no would be the answer. So you have the option to refer. You want to make sure that your clients know about this process, that if they feel like they need to be seeing somebody else, or if there's another option for them, you're there to facilitate that process for them. And I just got off track with that one, but I feel like that was somewhere in my slides. Who knows? So now we're moving into the limits. Well, the relationship to closure. Okay, I put a lot of information in the module. That's where it is, about rural communities and ethics and ethical dilemmas that pop up in rural communities. So that's where you can find some additional information about that. So as counselor trainees, in terms of confidentiality, there are lots of limits of confidentiality when you're doing role plays and when you have people that are volunteering to sit there on the other side of a phone camera, typically, or a computer camera, and have themselves recorded. Same goes with Immersive Week and the recordings that you'll do for your final baseline videos, and all the recordings you'll do for Counseling 606. So you want to make sure that those individuals know that that yes, you will be doing your best to maintain confidentiality, and that but that the one person that would be watching, reviewing those recordings, is your instructor, and so that is a limit to confidentiality. In different settings, and again, you will get, this is the tip of this iceberg, of this ethical iceberg, okay? But there's a difference between confidentiality and a group work setting versus confidentiality in an individual setting. You as a group leader, for example, have no control outside of that group that group that you're actually leading counseling. You have no control what group members do outside of those group counseling sessions. So there are massive limits to confidentiality when you're working with groups. And within individual therapy, again, it's more, you're able to better control confidentiality within that individual counseling relationship. Working with families, a whole other host of issues that can come up. The family unit is your client, not one particular individual. And depending on the ages of children, if there are children involved, you might have to determine, what, again, state regulations might say about confidentiality of minors, and what legal right to the information that a minor shares with you, the parents or guardians would have. So in terms of competence, what does it mean to be a competent counselor? Well, you're building your competence right now in this program. You are much more competent now than you were in August. And so we continue to build competence as we continue through our careers as counselors. When you aren't competent in one area of counseling, the best thing to do, if you're interested in that particular area, is to start to build competence. And you do that by reading books, reading journal articles, training, going to trainings around that area. If there's a specific specialization that you're interested in, doing webinars and going to conferences can be very useful. Workshops can be very helpful. Obtaining additional certifications. Every counselor starts out from the ground, right? And they work their way up. So you will build competence even more so in practicum, and in internship you will build a ton of competence ideally. If not, then we're going to be gatekeeping and making sure that you're not going out into the real world. But there's an understanding, I think, from the counseling profession as a whole that the new novice counselors are still budding counselors, and you're still building competence. So when you are not competent to provide counseling to a client for one reason or another, maybe it's that you have never worked with a client with that particular mental health impairment before, or that is dealing with a particular situation. You have to gauge, is it a situation where between when you're meeting with the client and the next time, can you develop competence in a way that's appropriate so that you can be helping the client? Or do you need to be making a referral? Or do you need to be working with your supervisor closely so that you're providing appropriate services? So that's really important to kind of be self-aware of where you're coming to, how you're coming to a client and what stage of development you're in. And conflicting values, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Our moral and ethical values are going to differ from our clients. Our clients are not always going to be the same type of person that we are. And depending on where you're working, you may not have the option to refer to another counselor. When you start referring to other counselors, then you're building up their caseload while you're not taking on anybody on your own. Other counselors can get a little bit irritated about that. But you have to weigh out some options whenever there's a value conflict within the counseling relationship. You need to ask yourselves how important is this to the counseling relationship and to the goals that my client has set, that our values are conflicting. What role would these conflicting values play in our counseling relationship? Is it more on me? Do I need to have additional supervision to talk it out, to figure out if my values are going to seep through the work that I'm doing with the client unknowingly? Or is it something where I can still maintain that professional boundary with my client and not impose my values on them, because the values and beliefs that I have really don't have anything to do with the goal that my client is wanting to reach. So that's my very brief introduction to ethics in counseling, and the appendix has more information on that as well, and I hope that you'll find the supplemental information that I put on the discussion or in the content areas for the module useful. And I'll check in on the discussion board as well to see if anybody has any questions about ethics. But again, remember, this is the first of many times you'll hear about ethics as it relates to counseling.